There's a reason why I do what I do, and there's a reason why I believe what I believe, and I know what I know. It's because I have to stress test everything, and you can't just walk into a room and see what you see. If you're not trained to see what's actually going on, you don't see it. And I think that's the problem. So a lot of people who think that they know what they're doing as journalists, that's why Katie Hopkins made so many mistakes, because she's not a journalist. She said the wrong things at the wrong time to the wrong people and to the wrong audience. As a broadcaster now, if you say, you know, let's get back to the Blitz spirit, you get ridiculed by these people because they actually are ashamed of their own history. These are the kind of people that would attack me for saying Churchill was a great man. Let's take his statue down. Why? Well, because he firebombed Dresden. Yeah, well, we were at fucking war with them, if you don't mind me saying so. That's why. And I'm afraid if you start attacking other countries, you might be facing a bit of an attack yourself. You know, war's horrible, but we won.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Mike Graham, the British journalist, national radio host, and former newspaper editor. Over the past 3 decades, you have operated your own news agency in New York City, been the foreign editor for the Daily Express, and reported from dangerous environments around the world, including the Bosnian War. Your show, The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on talkRADIO, is dubbed the home of common sense, where you question our leaders' decisions and the dubious role of the mainstream media in political agendas. You have consistently called for an end to the coronavirus lockdown in order to reignite the economy and taken a clear stand against reactionary cancel culture and dangerous pandemic fear-mongering. Mike, welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much indeed. You make me sound like a bit of a sort of a caped crusader there. But listen, there's a lot to fight against right now. So, you know, I'd rather be on the side of the underdog. I've always preferred that. And people have always said to me, oh, you're a Tory, you're a Conservative, you support the government. I did support the government up until the moment at which we decided that now it's time to lift the lockdown, because I think they had to do that. They had to lock it down. But now they need to stop locking it down. And I'm going to have a go at them until they do.
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing that. And I want to get into it all right now. Before we start, I just want to announce that we're streaming now on our Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people. And it's available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Just want to ask everyone now to please share this link via the sidebar to all your social media channels. And let me just repeat that. Can everyone share the link via their sidebar to their social media channels? I always say, just ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes, and then they can decide. Mike, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anybody in the world can watch the full version of this free at freedomplatform.tv/Graham. Thanks to the generous donations of over 35,000 people around the world that I call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can go to freedomplatform.tv/give to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And Mike, I'm excited to have you here today. I want to talk about censorship first, because the reason we're streaming on this Digital Freedom Platform is because 4 months ago, on August 6th, we had a broadcast right in this studio. It was the second largest YouTube live stream in the world that day, second only to President Trump's coronavirus briefing. And based on the numbers of that episode and a previous one, we thought this would probably go on to be watched 30 or 40 million times. It was a massive episode. David Icke was in the house. And we got out of here and we're like, wow, this is going to be massive. 30 minutes later, YouTube deleted and banned the video. And we've been in this weird fight with censorship ever since. And we've been told in no certain terms by YouTube that I'm one upload away from being completely deplatformed. Right. And I've got 250 million views, 8,000 videos, 9 years, probably made them millions of dollars in advertising revenue. So I'm in this weird situation where I'm like in the penalty box. And I'm curious, you guys are growing massively. Yeah. You're getting big on YouTube. It's amazing to see. I'm curious, because I feel like it's maybe only a matter of time before you start bumping up against some of this censorship. What do you think of some of these digital platforms and, the fact that you might start coming up against some of this censorship?
Well, it's interesting you say it because, you say you're in a penalty box, but I don't know who sets the penalty box up, who puts people in it, who decides what should make you go in there in the first place, because there's no actual set of rules. It's a bit like the new rules that we get told how to behave during this lockdown. You kind of go, so I can go and stand over there, but I couldn't stand over there with you because you're from a different household. But I could go to the pub over here and meet you in the pub, even though I don't know you, and I could start talking to you, and that would be okay. That's just kind of, for me, how YouTube operates, because you don't know until you've done something that you shouldn't have done it, which makes it a bit difficult to operate as a broadcaster because you don't know quite where the rules are. It's slightly different for us because we are, technically speaking, a radio show which is broadcast on YouTube as a video.
Right.
So we are already behaving within a set of regulations which are set by Offcom,
right,
who are inside the radio business.
Which means you can't say certain things.
Well, there are things that you have to be careful about. You have to try and be as balanced as you can possibly be.
Right.
There's always an argument going on about whether you're balanced as a broadcast itself or whether you're broadcasting in general is balanced.
Right.
That's something that people go backwards and forwards on. There was an interesting piece actually written, funnily enough, I think in The Guardian, by somebody from Offcom who actually said, I think if the balance can be achieved overall, then that's okay, because it's kind of ludicrous to expect a personality-based radio station to not have personalities who have opinions.
Yeah.
And you have to have opinions. And there's nothing worse for me than broadcasters who pretend that they don't have any opinions, but they actually do. For example, Emily Maitlis on Newsnight, when she launches an attack on Boris Johnson, is clearly, it's clearly a biased opinion. I don't care that she's got it, but let's not pretend that it's not,
right,
and pretend that it's some kind of, much holier than thou kind of measurement of what everybody thinks of the Prime Minister. So yeah, you're right. The bigger you get, I'm already getting more flack, I would say, on social media from the lefty brigade because they now know who I am and they don't like what I do and they quite like to shut me down. So there's quite a few instances of people kind of piling on me. I'm a big boy, I can take it, I don't really mind. But I think it's interesting that all of the kind of cancel culture appears to be cancelling in one direction, rather than another.
Yeah. Do you ever bump up against Offcom regulations? Have you been censored or said don't do this or that?
I've had complaints against me. I think most radio journalists have, radio presenters will have, because the trouble is with the system that you can be broadcasting to 1 million people and one person can complain, and that's a registered Ofcom complaint, and then they have to investigate it and they have to find out whether or not you breached the law and breached the rules. And sometimes they could fine you quite heavily, which hurts a lot of businesses, even if they're big businesses, because nobody wants to have to pay out 20 grand or 30 grand or 100 grand of a fine just because somebody said something wrong. And
do you have to be careful what you say off platform? Because I remember I had Max Kaiser in here who had a show on RT, and he said, Brian, don't ask me about the Queen, don't ask me about the election, because if I say it even on your show, Offcom can come after me.
Well, I've never had that conversation with anybody, no. Okay. But generally speaking, because I am a radio broadcaster and because I work on the radio for a company, that company would expect me to be consistent, I suppose you would say. So I wouldn't suddenly turn into some rabid version of rogue Mike Graham when I came on here. I probably will sound very much as I would sound when I'm on Talk Radio, because, I'm not going to make claims about things that I don't know to be true. And I'm certainly not going to dismiss things that I don't know to be true either. I'm going to listen to people's arguments. This is the reputation that we've got, I think, at Talk Radio, where, you don't have to agree with me. You and I were talking before about Howard Stern. He's a guy who I sort of grew up in America listening to and watching. And he always used to say that, people who like me listen for 20 minutes, people who hate me listen for half an hour. And so that's kind of one of my mantras that I repeat to people and go, I don't mind who you are or what you do or whether you agree with me or not, as long as you're listening.
But it's an important point. I think in order to know what your point of view is, you need someone with the opposite point of view to articulate an argument so you can actually say, well, actually, do I feel that way? Yeah. And let me talk about that. And that's what censorship really bothers me, because there's a lot of points of view. So, for example, when we had that episode, questions about COVID, questions about 5G, questions about vaccines, and YouTube said, you can't talk about it because of this community policy that was very subjective.
And surely it's better to talk about it rather than it is to not talk about it. Because all you then do, if it is a conspiracy theory, for example, that's just going to make it worse by shutting it down. The people who really believe it, even though it might not be true, are going to be even more convinced that there's a kind of establishment cover-up going on.
Yeah, I had a scientist he said the solution to bad information is more information.
Yeah.
And also I said, look at the flat earthers. they're doing all this stuff. And like, if you want to believe in flat Earth, God bless. I don't.
Right.
But those videos are everywhere on YouTube. But if you put up a theory that maybe COVID-19 test is false positive or negative, or the RNA doesn't make sense, or that maybe 5G lowers the immune system, Offcom freaks out, YouTube freaks out. Yeah. God bless you. Say anything about a vaccine, you're done. So again, there's no debate, there's no argument, and it starts to look suspect. And again, these are controlled by a handful of people in Silicon Valley, the 4 guys that were in Congress, basically.
Yes, that was a strange viewing experience, wasn't it?
That was fascinating.
I was watching it, and I was sitting in my living room, and I'm thinking to myself, these guys are probably the owners of about 50% of the world's wealth.
Oh, they're massive,
right?
Yeah.
Just between the 4 of them.
Yeah.
And they're actually sitting there.
Like schoolboys.
Like schoolboys, as if they really want to be there and as if they really want to help. And I didn't believe a word of it.
No, they were acting like schoolboys, but they were also answering like they really didn't give a shit.
Right.
And there wasn't much you're going to do anyways. No. And we're going to be nice to you, but also... fuck you.
But also, it's like in the back of my house, I've got this like death machine, which I'm going to point at your building and I'm going to fry everybody in it.
Or point at your competitors in the race and fry everybody.
Jeff Bezos, who builds a ridiculous looking clock in the desert, which cost him something like 10 million or something, and you're going to go, what's he done? You're not going to tell me. And before anybody starts to say that this should be banned, I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Bezos was developing some kind of mad scheme because he's got that much money. Why wouldn't he? I mean, if you're that wealthy, you would be, he's probably building the Death Star or something in his back garden. You know what I mean? It's very possible. So you got the left there that are also doing their thing and potentially, making calls when it comes to these new technology platforms. Right. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, you've watched the whole, evolution of the press. Yeah. I mean, you worked here in London in the press rooms, and you've seen it come all the way up to where now you're a YouTuber. Yeah, I know. Incredible. It's crazy. It is. But what do you see? I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge that I don't have, the YouTubers don't have. I mean, you've watched the press evolve into the state now where, you've got, you were telling me earlier, you got likes and comments to worry about, a whole nother version, but also something that scales you to potentially tens of millions of more people. Yeah. Are you happy with the way the press has evolved, or do you wish it was like the old days? I think inevitably it did have to evolve from what it was, but just because of all the other things that were happening around it. Because when I tell my kids, when I used to have to go and find somebody, I used to get on a plane from New York. I remember going to Kansas City once to find some old family who were doing something or other. This is you being a reporter. This is me being a reporter. Shoe leather on a plane. Get into the hire car, drive into the center of Kansas City, find a public library. Find all the phone books, start going through the phone books to look for the names of the people. Get a list of maybe 10 addresses, get in the car, go to every single one until you find them. And they're looking at me like, what? You did? How long did that take? I said, well, sometimes it took a couple of days. But then we found them and then we did the story. And so now, of course, they just go Google. Yeah. And a lot of people now, not my children, because I won't let them do it, don't learn anything because they just figure they could look it up. Yeah. I mean, I've had people that work with me, young producers in their 20s, and I go, how can you not know that? And they go, well, I don't need to know anything. If I need something, I'll just look it up. And so from the newspaper point of view, most people, funnily enough, I was watching an old movie with my 15-year-old, Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. You might have seen it, about a guy, it's a Cary Grant film where he goes up to Connecticut, buys a house, it's a complete nightmare, everything goes wrong. He works in the advertising business in New York. And he's in his apartment in New York, and he goes to the front door, answers it, and takes a newspaper. And I said to my son, that's the first moment that he will know what happened in the world yesterday. Right. He's reading a newspaper today about what happened yesterday. And again, he's looking at me like, what? I said, now we know what happens in Lebanon. Yeah. Literally the second a bomb goes off. Yeah. The same second. And it's broadcast all over the world. And I think for me, what really changed the world of newspapers certainly was the first Gulf War, because I was working in America. And in those days, I would call up and say somebody's been shot on the courthouse steps outside of a divorce court in Florida. They'd go, right, page one, great story. Now I would call them and say, oh, have you seen that, Bush is doing this, doing that? Yeah, we're watching it on CNN. So they had CNN on in the newsroom in London. Right. And that was the end, I think, of the old-fashioned kind of reporting, really. So everything was changing already. Because of the 24-hour news channels. Because of 24-hour news channels. Right, and so Ted Turner kind of, I guess, started that revolution. And even then, people were saying, when Sky started up, people were going, who's going to watch television news for 24 hours? And well, a lot of people do. Some people only watch news 24 hours because there's nothing else worth watching. So I think newspapers have had their time, basically, and I think their influence is dwindling. I think they're now more likely to be the deliverers of something else. For example, the Times has got a very successful digital subscriber system now, where you can get an iPad version of the Times, which I happen to love. It's not just because they're in the same company, because some people don't do it very well. The Mail, for example, which is a great product, doesn't do its iPad version very well. Neither does the Telegraph. They've got people, you've got to pay to get behind a paywall. It's just not worth doing. But I remember when I was working for the Mail on Sunday at one point, and it was during that period when they would give away a DVD of a movie with the paper. And the magazine editor that I was working with at the time said, one day they'll be giving a paper away with a DVD. And she was right. Because actually, who buys a newspaper anymore? I mean, when I see them in the mornings, I love ripping up The Guardian, as you probably know. It's one of my favourite pastimes. But I would not actually physically buy a newspaper anymore. And I never thought, when I was working for them, I'd ever say that.
Yeah. So let's talk about you ripping up The Guardian, and let's talk about newspapers and mainstream media and the New York Times. Like, what are they these days?
Yeah.
Because you're critical of these.
Yes.
These
well,
things.
I was always very critical of the New York Times, because the New York Times is very far up its own backside. Even when I was working in New York in the 80s and 90s, they thought of themselves as these wonderful kind of, writers, and, they didn't have, as far as I could see, a news bone in their body. They didn't really know what a story was. We used to joke about them, the fact that, they had 4 correspondents in Africa, but they didn't have anyone in the Bronx. And we used to say, why haven't you got anyone in the Bronx? To which they would say, well, we haven't got any readers there. And you'd be like, you haven't got any readers in Africa either, but you've got 4 people there. And that was kind of the beginning, I suppose, of my distaste for what I call snobby journalism.
Okay, and also kind of leftists.
Yeah. It was difficult for me at first to kind of get my head around, because they were obviously very pro-Israel.
Right.
Which meant that, normally speaking, from where I came from, that would make them right-wing. Okay. But they weren't. They were left-wing and pro-Israel. And it was my introduction, I guess, to the whole kind of New York thing, where, I say to people, I was born and raised a Catholic, went to Catholic schools, but because I lived for 10 years in New York, I feel sort of half Jewish, because you become part of that culture. And it's a great culture. But I was quite puzzled at the beginning. It didn't seem quite as far left then as it is now.
Well, there used to be really clear lines back then, too. You were left and you thought these things, you were right, you thought these things, and nothing was mixed because there was no real nuance to explain it. These days, you've got, Candace Owens, a black woman who's massively conservative and against Black Lives Matter, and you've got everything in between. Yeah. And people can understand it.
Right. And people can't quite work out where they're supposed to be, I think. And I think that's the problem with a lot of journalism these days is sort of practiced by very well-educated people, whereas when I came into newspapers, I was coming in at the end of what was, to all intents and purposes, a trade. You didn't have to go to university to be a reporter. Basically, you could leave school at 16, you could go learn shorthand, do a typing course, and get hired by the local paper, and, make your way to Fleet Street, which was all great and very good and successful, and people got paid well. But they weren't all from private school. They weren't all from sort of, Oxbridge, which is what we have a lot of now. A lot of the people on TV don't know what real ordinary people's lives are like. They just have no idea.
So they're in an ivory tower and they just judge.
So they can't understand, for example, your formerly Labour voting working class man in Sunderland who wants to leave the European Union because it doesn't do anything for him.
Right.
They couldn't even get their heads around that because they live in places like Chiswick, or they live in places like Barnes, or they live in places like, I don't know, even Canary Wharf.
Right. So even though they vote the same, they don't understand these other people.
No. I think the change in the Labour Party's structure has shown that, because what the Labour Party now is, or what it's definitely not, is a party for the working people of this country. It's a party for sort of pseudo-intellectual Guardian readers. And that's it. That's why the only place they won an actual vote of any worth was Putney, Southwest London, where the houses average $1.5 million. But they lost the red wall. That all went because there's nobody who can believe in what the Labour Party stands for anymore.
Wow, so they're completely out of touch.
They're totally out of touch. They're all about, supporting transgender people, which a lot of people in Sunderland, and I'm not, just picking on Sunderland, but people in working class areas don't really talk about that. It's not something on the top of their agenda. They talk about work. They talk about Brexit. They talk about, going on holiday. They don't talk about whether or not, a woman has a cervix and a man doesn't.
Well, let's talk about this. Why are we talking about this stuff? Is that part of this whole woke generation?
I think it is.
And what is going on? Why are we having these strange conversations where, there's all these different gender types and we're going all down a very dark rabbit hole when it comes to this stuff? And then you've got most of the mainstream media, pushing this line.
I think a lot of the mainstream media are frightened because we now live in this culture whereby if you do stand up for something which is not thought to be, trendy or woke, you then get attacked by all these people who are supposed to be the new tolerant people, but who are actually the least tolerant people around. And so they'll come for you. and they'll come after you. And they'll make you, and it's like Peter Hitchens has said to me, they don't want you not to argue with them. They don't want you to speak. They just want you to shut up and not say what you want to say.
Yeah.
They don't want to have an argument. They don't want to have a debate about it.
They just want to shame you, cancel you.
Yeah, it's not to be debated. You're a bad man, so therefore you should sit over there and stop talking.
Is that also a product of digital communication? Like, would this have happened if we were actually talking to each other in the past?
Well, I think the trouble now, and I say this often, much to probably the chagrin of some people, that everybody's now got an opinion. Whereas when I was a lot younger, everybody didn't have an opinion.
Right.
Now you've got the ability to publish it because you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook or whatever else.
Blogs, microblogs.
Yeah. I mean, a number of people that write blogs that literally nobody reads. And you come across these people on social media, blogger, and then you go and look at it and it's got how many views? Oh, no views. So literally nobody has looked at this, right?
So you're not a
written
blogger.
it. You're not really a blogger. And if you are a blogger, so what? Why would I care what your opinion is? Because, I take the view that, yes, of course you're entitled to have an opinion. But I used to say when I did an overnight radio show, which was very interesting, it was full of people who had all sorts of bizarre thought processes and conspiracy theorists and all the rest of it. And I used to say to some of them, I said, look, your opinion is not worth, they would say, my opinion is just as worthy as yours. I'd say, no, it isn't. It is actually not. Because you haven't done what I've done. You haven't been where I've been. You haven't talked to people the way I've talked to people. So actually, no, your opinion isn't valid. So shut up or come back with a better opinion.
Right. That's proven, that has some logic to it, that's been tested, debated, stress test, and then talk to me.
Right. Whereas the trouble, I think, now is that we're living in a society where as long as enough people agree with you, because there's this word consensus that they use a lot, Of course, the scientific consensus around climate change is that, the climate's heating up. Well, I don't care. There used to be consensus about the moon being made of cheese or the earth being flat, Doesn't make it right just because a lot of people agree.
Do you worry that all of this quote-unquote science has all been co-opted and politicized and weaponized to where nobody trusts anything anymore?
Yeah, well, that is the other problem.
And same with COVID.
Yeah, I think that is the problem. I mean, we've been told since the beginning of this in March that, the government has followed the science. Problem is the science has been all over the place. I mean, if you were following the science, you'd actually be dizzy now from all of the different places that you had to follow it to because it changes every week.
So let's get your opinion.
Wear a mask, don't wear a mask.
Yeah. Where have we, your opinion, Mike Graham, the last 5 months, how do you rate Britain's response to this China virus?
Well, I'm not one of those that gives the government too hard of a time. Okay. There are those who would do that. I think lately it's been all over the place. I think they've sort of lost the plot in the last 3 to 4 weeks. But I would say that at the beginning, I don't think anyone really knew what to do. When Boris Johnson was shaking people's hands at Twickenham, he was doing that because he thought that was the right thing to do. He wasn't being blasé about it. And in the end, I remember somebody saying, everyone will probably get this disease at some point or other. Most people will get it and not have a problem. Some people will die.
I mean, Sir Patrick Vallance was talking herd immunity early on.
Yeah.
So, and I did a vlog saying, I'm ready to get it. It's only a matter of time. We thought that in the beginning.
Absolutely.
It still might be true.
It still might be true. Yeah. And I mean, we might have all had it for all I know.
Exactly.
Because, we can test each other at certain points, but not all tests are good, apparently. Sometimes if you get tested, you might have been tested too late since before you had it. Lots of people have said to me they thought they had something like it before the end of last year, sort of November, December time, which then feeds you into the other argument is, well, could this already be the second wave then? Maybe this is the second wave. But it's very, very difficult to judge. I think the problem has been that people understood the first instruction, stay home, just don't go out. And lots of people did that. But you can't do that forever. And it's a lot easier to lock it down than it is to open it up. And now I think they're sort of floundering around. So I would start off by saying they handled it pretty well as anybody else could. But I mean, now, for example, I was asking the question in March, why are we not quarantining people coming here from Italy, from Tehran, and from China? Flights were still coming in every day, and nobody was checking them. And I was told by the scientists in those days, oh, well, there's no point really, because the disease is already here. So now they want to quarantine people. And I go, why are you quarantining them now? Oh, well, because we want to keep the spread low. Right. And these are the same people. Yeah. So you kind of go in, if you're sitting there and you're Boris Johnson, who is obviously slightly spooked by this because he nearly died, right? And I'm certainly not one of those who thinks that was all just a ruse, by the way, just before, in case you want to ask me that.
He's spooked for a lot of reasons because it controls the economy, which controls his approval rating.
But there's clearly a fight going on inside Downing Street between Chris Whitty, the medical officer, and Boris. And Dominic Cummings is somewhere in the mix, who I'm also told is quite frightened of it as well, because he, I think, was quite ill. But they seem to be incapable. I've said this week that they're standing on a kind of crossroads now. They need to make a decision. They have to decide, if this is going to be here for a long time, let's find some kind of strategy to live with it, rather than just being frightened of it. So every time 2 people get infected on a train, you shut the train service down. I mean, you can't operate like that. It makes no sense.
Did they overdo the fear, do you think, in March and April?
Well, I think they overdid the fear because everyone was a bit frightened.
And that was the only way to get people to actually stay home.
I don't think they did it deliberately. I think they actually genuinely thought that this was the next big killer.
Yeah.
And I was never one of those who was frightened to go out, because I continued to go to work. But I was careful, and I really didn't know.
Yeah, we saw the Imperial College numbers, and they were massive.
Yeah.
2 million dead in America,
Right.
500,000 dead here.
Right.
And I remember having that moment, where I was like, Jesus,
Yeah.
this could be like, are my children going to make it type thing.
And also, I don't think any of us thought in March that we'd still be here now. I think we all thought, it'll be about a month, and then something will kind of change and we'll be back to normal. Because you couldn't possibly have envisaged this, that this would be where we are, that I'm not able to go and visit my mother in America because I'd need to quarantine, for 2 weeks. And also, I don't really want to give her COVID because she's 96 years old. I don't think she'd live through it. I haven't seen my daughter, who works in Dubai. She's currently in America, but she can't come through London because there's quarantine, and she can't quarantine here. So, it's bizarre. I don't think any of us could have seen this coming, really.
Right. I mean, in retrospect, and hindsight's always 20/20, they probably over-locked it down. They should have locked down maybe the people that were, potentially dangerous. I think a total of 400 people under 60 in the UK died from this. The numbers are staggering.
The numbers of people who have died under the age of 40, I think, is in single figures.
Right.
Who did not have something else wrong with them.
Right.
But again, when you're dealing with something this much of an unknown, and we didn't really get much help from China, and we didn't get much help from the World Health Organization, who also didn't until I think the end of January, towards the beginning of February, even say that it was a problem. They were saying in mid-January that this would not be transmissible between humans. This is the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
know?
What do you think about all of that, the relationship with the World Health Organization and China, what Trump did, Gates, the whole thing?
Well, I think
there.
funnily enough, Trump is getting a lot of flack for the way he's dealt with it. But again, I don't think you can have a go at Trump for doing anything wrong. I mean, the one instinct he had that was right was to stop people flying into America.
Yeah, from China.
Who were from other countries, yeah. I mean, Americans were still flying in. But he would have been getting the same kind of advice, I guess, from his people as to how to defend it. But in America, as you know better than me, it's not so easy to lock people down, because, people are going to stand up for their freedom, and they're going to go, no, I'm not going to be told. I mean, I've seen people being interviewed say, I'm not going to be told what to wear. I'm not going to wear a mask,
it's harder, and then there's federal versus state, so that makes it a little trickier.
Yeah. And also, I think China generally, is a very bad actor here. China has never done us any favors. They were secretive. They didn't do the things they should have done. They pretended nothing was wrong. They lied to the World Health Organization, And the one thing I think that I noticed probably before any of this happened was that there was a lot more Chinese tourism going on around the world suddenly. In the last 2-3 years, you wouldn't see very, very many people from China in the center of London or in the center of Paris or in New York. Now, I think when the outbreak happened, there was something like 1 million Chinese abroad traveling, and that's the scale of the problem, because in this day and age, that's how quickly it spreads. So I think China is I at one point have said that I think they should be paying some kind of reparation to every country in the world, because they got the money. They owe everybody's debt, don't they? They own it all. Yeah. So I think they should become somehow recompensing us. If it's costing us, I don't know, 100 billion to support our economy, let's get it from them.
Yeah, good luck with that, huh?
Well,
if you were Prime Minister right now, what would you do?
If I was Prime Minister right now, I would insist on the civil service coming back to work for a start. I would stop this kind of ridiculous, we're too frightened to go back to work business, which seems to be going on, because there's no reason to be frightened to go back to work. If you're genuinely at risk because you've got some kind of condition, then fine. But I think we've got to take the view that, if we don't do something soon, there's going to be nothing left to save. If all of London is as it is now, which is pretty much shut down. I mean, you might think that there's people working, and there are, but nothing like in the numbers that there should be. Canary Wharf, I haven't been to. I used to work there, I'm told, is a complete ghost town, because people like Goldman Sachs, who have got space for 10,000 people in their office, are letting in something like 200. And you can't sustain, the old Burley's, sandwich shop where you pay 10 quid for a sandwich. They're not going to be open. So they're not going to be making any money. They're not going to be paying any tax. The people that work for them are being furloughed by the government. So it's costing us money. They've got to get everything back as best they can, as quickly as they can. But I'm unsure really about how commerce is going to deal with that.
What about London as a city? I mean, again, I walk around and this is not sustainable. The city's going to die at this standpoint. But this is a beautiful, amazing, vibrant city, but it needs to get back to work. But people need to get a push back to work somehow, right?
Seemingly, people are frightened of traveling. I don't know whether it's a combination. I mean, I hear this from my listeners. It's a combination of people not wanting to get on a train because they're worried about getting an infection. And then there's other people who don't want to get on a train because they refuse to wear a mask. I don't think it's 50-50. I think it's probably like 80-20. Right. And the smaller number are the numbers who don't want to wear a mask. Because the roads are absolutely jam-packed, incredibly jam-packed, right? Because one of the things that people forget about the way our society has changed is that all this online purchasing that people do creates a hell of a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
If you order 5 things on 5 different days, you've got 5 different vans coming to your house, right? Now, can't tell me that's not going to have some kind of impact when millions of people are doing it on an hourly basis, Yeah. And so the trains are still empty. So, people that I know who are coming into work in London, say from Kent, an hour, 45 minutes away on a train, literally deserted at rush hour. Same with the tubes. Nobody's on them.
Yeah, I mean, I took one this morning from my place. Nobody's on there. There was an article in the New York Times, your favorite place, but recently said that actually the subway is one of the least likely places to catch it because people aren't talking on there. They're spaced apart. New York is the same thing. They're at 20% capacity, and this is the lifeline of that city, as you know. But you got to do something to get these people back to work and back in offices. London is 20% of GDP in this country, and at this rate, if it's doing 20% of the business it was doing, I'd be shocked. Right. And long term, it just doesn't bode well for anything this company.
Well, I don't understand what the buildings people are doing. I don't understand how commercial rents are not absolutely plummeting. Yeah. And I don't understand how even ordinary residential properties are plummeting. Because I'm hearing that a lot of people are moving out of London. I think unfortunately, we've got this kind of, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it, bedwetters kind of organisation of society where people are frightened of everything. And they just, my father would say they're not people for the trenches, because when the shit hits the fan, these guys are all running in the opposite direction. They're not worried about you. They're only worried about themselves. And they just go, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to leave the city and I'm just going to work remotely on my laptop because it's made in China, it's made by Apple, but I'm a very fine, upstanding person. I read The Guardian and I won't have any right-wing nonsense in my house. And you go, well, what are you doing for the country exactly? Nothing.
So that's my question. Is this all related? Is the wokeness and the cancel culture related to the snowflake culture who doesn't want to come back to work and suck it up?
Yeah.
I mean, look, 2 things. I was here for the bombings in 2007. Yeah. And it was horrific. But one thing I noticed is, I think they were on a Thursday. The next Friday, Londoners went back to work. Yes. And I was like, wow, these are some
And they went back on the tube as soon as they could.
I was like, these are some badasses. Right. And I was New York for 9/11, and that city was reeling for a while. Yeah. And I was like, okay, these are the Brits, Battle of Britain. These people go, they sip upper lip, they go back to work. I was impressed.
But now,
I'm not.
As a broadcaster now, if you say, let's get back to the Blitz spirit, you get ridiculed by these people because they're ashamed of their own history. These are the kind of people that would attack me for saying Churchill was a great man. Let's take his statue down. Why? Well, because he firebombed Dresden. Yeah, well, we were at fucking war with them, if you don't mind me saying so. That's why. And I'm afraid if you start attacking other countries, you might be facing a bit of an attack yourself. War's horrible, but we won. And if we hadn't won, where would we be? We'd be being told what to wear, what to do, and what to eat. A bit like now.
But you can't say that now. Right, but you can't say that now. No. Right? It's much worse in America, but they say everything comes here a few years later, so it's going to get worse.
Well, I don't understand what's happened in America because when I lived there, it was a very, I wouldn't say, peaceful place, but it was a very lovely country. And one of the many reasons that I wanted to live in America was I always admired it. I always admired in the same way that Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan got along. Yeah. There was a certain kind of thing about America first and about, I remember getting in a cab. They used to have these Skyline cabs that we used to use all the time.
Big ones.
The big blue Buicks.
Oh, they would drive you places.
Yeah, and they would take you to the airport and stuff, because I was always going to the airport. And I got in, there was a guy called Charles Bremner, who at the time was the Times correspondent there. And he'd been in Russia, he'd been the Moscow correspondent. We got in this car, and the guy was clearly Russian. He had a very Russian, heavy accent. And Charles, very sort of, slightly pompously, turned to me and said, watch this. And he said to him, where are you from? And the guy goes, New Jersey. and that was where he was from. Of course, he was from Russia originally, but as far as he was concerned, he was an American. He was a guy that lived in New Jersey, and that was now where he was from. And that kind of, for me, encapsulated America, that people could come to America, particularly New York, from all over the world, and they were New Yorkers almost immediately, because it really was that kind of place. And now I see some of the stuff that goes on, like Portland. I had no idea what that's all about. I watched the report last night on Channel 4 News, which I watched just to get annoyed, really, because Channel 4 News I hate with a passion. But
why?
Just because it's so biased and so pretendingly straight. Jon Snow cycles to work every day. I'm not a big fan of cyclists, for a start. He also...
it's a token gesture like Cameron used to do.
Yeah.
You're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You got your SUV following you to work. What point are you trying to make?
What point are you trying to make?
Right, okay.
And, I've always said that anyone who wears a tie that's more eccentric than he is isn't very eccentric. And he likes to think of himself. He's not a very nice guy, Jon Snow. I've met him a few times.
Okay.
But they just do this ridiculous kind of relentless lefty journalism. But they were doing this piece about Portland, and it was basically going... The problem is, and even they'd actually seen it, they were interviewing black people saying that this is not what we want. We don't want people rioting on our behalf. Most of these people rioting are Antifa, they're fascists, they're all white. They're looting, they're smashing up the place, they're chucking things at the police. They're not doing it in our name, but except they are.
Right.
And that's very strange. That kind of whole Antifa thing didn't exist in the 80s in America. I never saw it.
Not at all.
No.
Back then, when I grew up, we looked up to heroes. We didn't look up to victims.
Yeah.
But that changed. It changed kind of when the world got digital too.
Yeah.
Like you said, where everyone maybe had a voice, and then now it's gone accentuated where you celebrate the victims.
Well, somebody said to me, actually, I think the first iPhone came out in something like 2005.
Yeah, it was 07, I think. But
It was 07.
Right.
It's around then.
Right.
And really since then, it's all started to go a bit wrong.
Right.
So there must be a correlation.
Citizen journalism and
Well, there
everyone
is
has
that.
a voice.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the other problem with some of these like citizen journalism escapades.
You don't like those people, do you?
Well, the thing is...
Because you put in your time.
Well, it's not just that I put in my time, but there's a reason why I do what I do, and there's a reason why I believe what I believe, and I know what I know. It's because I have to stress test everything. And you can't just walk into a room and see what you see. If you're not trained to see what's actually going on, you don't see it. And I think that's the problem. So a lot of people who think that they know what they're doing as journalists make massive... This is why Katie Hopkins made so many mistakes, because she's not a journalist. She said the wrong things at the wrong time to the wrong people and to the wrong audience.
Okay. What's another example of that? Like a citizen journalist will go to like a Black Lives Matter protest and they'll see one thing, whereas if you went there, you would say, no, this is happening.
Right.
I see this and I see this and I see the police and also...
one of the things that worries me a lot is all of the videos that you now see doing the rounds on Twitter. I'm very, very cautious with those. I tend not to retweet anything that I can't verify.
Okay.
Because I've seen in the past where you've got... for example, there was a picture going around at the weekend of this march in Berlin where loads of people, supposedly 1 million people, were marching against wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Now, according to the official figures that I saw, and again, you can always say, well, how do you trust the official figures? It was 17,000, which is still pretty sizable. There's nothing wrong with that. But why say it's 1 million? And why show a picture of a different march?
Yeah, I saw two pictures too. I saw the first one that was like 30,000.
Right.
And then I saw some other one that was like the bridge was packed.
Right.
And I was like, these are not the same.
It's not the same. No. And that's the trouble. You can watch a picture of, say, a police officer beating somebody up. And for all I know, because I can't see everything, it might not be a real image, or it might not be a current image. It might be from 2 years ago, it might be from 4 years ago, or it might be real. But if I don't know the source, then I'm very wary.
Well, let's talk about that, because I was speaking with a guest recently that talked about that concept where a piece of video, like people look at it as in that must be the truth.
Yeah.
But without context, you don't know what the truth is. And yet, when you retweet it, it becomes almost the truth.
Yeah.
And then everyone interprets what they want.
Yes.
And then later, if you come back and say, oh, by the way, that was on the back of that, it's too late.
Well, do you remember that there was a famous picture from one of the Black Lives Matter protests in London where a black guy was carrying a white guy out of a crowd.
Yes.
After he was supposedly being beaten up.
Right.
Supposedly helping this guy who was somehow falling foul of this black criminality.
Okay.
And
See, I thought that was real.
Well, I think it's a real picture,
Right,
but by looking at that picture at that moment, you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
All you know is that here's a guy carrying another guy out. Now, for all you know, he might be carrying him out to give him a good kicking on the ground once he's away from the police. You just don't know.
Right.
So it's really dangerous for people to just assume. And of course, The lefties all went with, oh, look at that. This shows you what's really going on here. The Black Lives Matter people are really nice people. Look, he's helping him.
Right.
And that may well be what was the case. But I mean, it might not be as well,
How does this play out? And how come, 80% of the mainstream media seems to be kowtowing to this readership that wants to be spoon-fed back, and they virtue signal that we're on your side? Like, how does this play out? Because it can't sustain. I had George Farmer on here, who's Candace Owens' husband. His father's Baron Farmer, and he said, Brian, they're going to eat their own. He said, look at them now. They already eat their own. Like, you're not woke as me, and I'm going to cancel you because you're not.
Well, I mean, look what happened to J.K. Rowling. I mean, she was, until that moment when she said the wrong thing about a cervix and about a period or something, she was one of them. Now she's not. Now she's in the same camp as I am, and probably as you are. The evil, the criminal, the nasty, the ghastly, the horrible people who don't care about anyone, because everybody knows if you've got any kind of right-wing opinion at all, you just don't even care about people, which is another complete and utter myth.
But how is that even sustainable?
I know.
I mean, these are, we're reasonable people. I talk to reasonable people all the time that have views that are conservative or right-leaning or just not super woke, radical left Marxist views.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have them, but they can't say it. I mean, in America, you can't put a Trump hat on or you think you get a beat down.
Right.
And so it's become this
But this is why
thing.
polls have become so pointless, because people don't admit to which way they're actually going to vote.
Right.
The shy Tories, they used to call them. I mean, nobody predicted that 80-seat majority back in December. In fact, as I was about to come in to do the overnight show that night, because we were counting down from, when the polls closed at 10:30, we were going to be there till 6 a.m. And already the Sky and BBC were reporting what was looking like a Labour victory, because it looked like it was a Labour victory on Twitter. Right? And they were saying things like there's been a massive turnout in all these, funnily enough, all southwest London constituencies, which one they actually did win. And I was suddenly going into work thinking, Christ almighty, what if we get to the end of this show tonight and Jeremy Corbyn's the Prime Minister? And I started to feel quite depressed about it, and I was thinking, because the man is a complete and utter joke of an individual, never mind. He's grumpy, he's a communist, he hates people like me and you. He wants us all to behave in a particular way, which only he will advocate. And he's just, he would have been he would have been a nightmare in this situation, in the whole COVID situation.
So even you were co-opted by a media that got you thinking that for a second, even though it was never the case.
And of course it was never the case.
And you're smart enough to know better, and still it tricked you.
But still I'm thinking, what if they're right? What if they're right?
Right.
And of course the exit polling that was then done started to look like more actually of what reality was like. And we were hearing suddenly around about sort of just before 10, something like a Tory win, but nothing like the 80 seats that they ended up getting, because people just won't admit they voted for them. Because, I've spoken to people who tell me, they go to take their kids to school, they can't tell the other parents at the school gates that they voted Tory.
Right.
Because they'd be ostracised, and their kids would be ostracised even worse.
Yeah.
And that's a really terrible place to be, I think.
But this can't last. And so my question is how much further does it have to go to the other side before it comes back? You mentioned Portland. We're seeing this crazy Chaz Chop City, let's defund the police, let's do it ourselves. And then an obvious, your socialism experience fails.
Right.
We see a lot of these things failing.
Right.
We see the Black Lives Matter protests where, bricks are all of a sudden on the side of the road and it's being funded by George Soros.
Right.
Like at one point, does the woke wake up?
Yeah, right. Well, I think when they grow up, perhaps, because I think part of the problem here is that it's the kind of youth movement. And I said to people when they started marching around in London, this won't last forever, because most of these people have got a very short attention span.
Right.
And most of them are pretty well off. They're not really struggling with anything. Most of them have been to university. There's the small kind of anarchistic types who are, our sort of version of a pound shop Antifa, because when you see the guys over there with guns, and sort of more or less militia type outfits.
In America.
With
the earpieces.
Yeah. And you start to think, blimey.
They're well funded.
Yeah. Very well funded.
A lot of money coming in.
A lot of guns. A lot of very expensive guns. So there's definitely a point at which that madness doesn't cut through to the main body of the hall, if you know what I mean.
Right. Different than like in the 60s when you were going to get drafted, you were going to go to Vietnam and you were going to die.
Right.
So you were in for maybe the longer haul.
Right.
This, you see a trendy thing, I want to get out there, start some mayhem, but it's not going to last.
It's not going to last because actually there isn't.
That takes work.
Because there isn't actually an aim to it. I had a guy called Gary, is it Gary McFadden or Gary McLaren or something like that? One of the guys from the Black Lives Matter movement here.
Okay.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.